Like Abe said, if you start in one of those other countries with the smaller markets that tend to have more stringent regulations, like I would always have to test for European regulations, which typically were more strict than the US. So if I had already tested over there, most of what I already pulled together for that would let me pass my US testing very quickly. So by starting there, by scaling your brand there, you actually are opening that door for yourself to easily be able to come in and do US compliance, which is usually less strict, and have success here when you're ready to do that as a brand.
Welcome to Top of Search with Robin and Abe, where we talk about e-commerce, Amazon, and more.
Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be talking about building a brand and how important it is on Amazon. I've got the amazing Jessica Wright. She's got over 15 years experience in e-commerce. She's a seasoned seller in both Vendor and Seller Central. She's also the president of AO2 Management. She also serves on the advisory council for Prosper. Not only has she been helping building and guiding brands for a long time, her longevity in the space gives her a unique perspective to be able to share what really is working today in e-commerce. So thank you so much for making the time to come on today.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I'm so happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Can you just share just a little snippet about, kind of how you got started and how you got to here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fun backstory just because I started in toy manufacturing. So it's, I think, unique in the space. There's not a lot of us who started in the toy industry who then kind of moved over into truly immersing ourselves in e-commerce. But that was me in 2008. I worked for a toy brand. We manufactured toy musical instruments, and I had to learn everything because e-commerce was really just starting. We started in, at that time, Amazon Dropship Central is what existed for us. And then that doesn't even exist anymore. It's not a thing. And drop shipping is not the ideal method anymore even. So I just kind of had to learn everything with how to manage our retail vendors as they were transitioning into online and how to handle all of these mom and pop online stores, in addition to the big marketplace at the time, which was Amazon. And I loved it so much and built everything I could for that company at the time. And then just continued on this journey of working them with more brands and then moving over to the agency and service provider side to be able to help even more brands at once.
Was the toy company that you were working with a larger company that had a bunch of different brands under their umbrella, or was it just one dedicated brand fighting in the world like a fish in the sea?
One brand, Show and Hut, a toy piano company. And I know that I say that wrong even to this day. I worked for them for a decade and I do not have the German accent. Yeah. Toy pianos, guitars, musical instruments, but just one company. And, not a massive company. Back in the day, we were probably doing around 6 million in wholesale, but there were about 7 of us, who truly did everything from R&D and, coming up with the item and creating it and supply chain and getting it online and fulfilling it. That included our, warehouse fulfillment team.
And then after that, is that when you moved to Seller Labs? And I know you're at AO2 now, but a lot of the same team is there.
Yeah, there was a little jump in between. A company, they're no longer around, sadly, just shut things down about a year and a half ago, I think. But they were kind of this early, not aggregator, but accelerator kind of hybrid. They had been one of our largest customers at Show and Hut, our largest vendors. And they actually, at one point, when I was ready to hand it off, took over all of our Amazon business. So we sold to them wholesale and they did all of the Amazon operations for us. We didn't have to touch it. And that's how I got involved with them. And so there we did that sort of accelerator type model with a lot of brands. During that time, and even during my time at Show and Hut, is when I had met the team at Seller Labs, become good friends with them, tried to go over there at least once or twice prior to joining the team, but they weren't remote yet. I was not interested in moving to Athens, Georgia at that time. And so during COVID is when Jeff reached out and was like, okay, we have this position now. It is a fully remote position. Do you want to join the team? And so I think that was 2020. We had that conversation, and officially 2021 is when I joined Seller Labs.
Nice.
Well, I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is that your journey, you started with brand and really I think the non-native Amazon brands, they really do start with building the brand first, where when we're working with private label companies, sometimes they start with the product first. And, for a long time that was really successful, but I know that you and Abe and I have all had conversations about how that Me Too private label kind of system just isn't as effective as it used to be. So I wanted to really have you on today to talk about what does it take to really build and protect a brand, because the days of just slapping spaghetti against the wall is not.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think I take a pretty hard stance on it, where probably some other people leave a lot more wiggle room. But I do. I think if you want to protect yourself and your business, and that's your model, you should figure out how to truly choose one of those things you're doing, turn it into a real brand, and spend a lot of time on that, because I don't believe there's a future for it. And I know there will be some that kind of slide in there, and there's always some gray area, but I kind of speak about it more in absolutes because I don't love it as a business model.
Well, and we've had companies that started with, even if you have a great product that brings something unique, if you're not protecting your intellectual property, then there's nothing to keep knockoffs coming on to the space. So, it protects you, it allows you to kind of build a moat around your business from the inevitable people that will come copy your product. So Abe, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that you have you might have a different perspective coming from more of the private label space.
It's definitely challenging because on one hand, coming out with innovative products that really add value to the market is really, really difficult. A lot of the brands I work with are fantastic, but they are really making small changes to the products that they offer. And if you're going to draw absolutes, you cut out a lot of people who can exist very successfully around the fringes, and you cut out people who can offer value to the market in other ways. So
Sure. Yeah.
there are always going to be people who their value is price. There is actually a value to having the lowest price, even if your product is not the best. There is absolutely a shopper. There's a whole business model for people who want to pay less and don't care about quality.
Well, and there are, price studies that have been done where actually some brands will, sell better, cheaper than they do more expensive. And, because there's that consumer that's looking for that. And you have to adjust based on it. And I think, just to clarify, my absolute is not know that you have to be something completely unique, but that you have to care about building a brand recognition, brand presence, brand loyalty, even if that is your brand is based on I'm the value version of this.
So as I hear that, I'm immediately struck with a question that I think anybody who spends a lot of time on Amazon will come up with a similar question, which is, how do you explain these foreign brands, which are basically a whole random assortment of vowels and consonants, doing enormous amounts of business? Now, there's a whole mess of them that don't do anything, but there are so many times where I do a search for a thing I want to buy. The top 4 of them, Amazon says they're selling hundreds, they're selling thousands of units a month. So how does that fit into a market where people are valuing brand?
I think we're in a time when it's shifting. And I think Amazon even has shown us that a little bit with Amazon Haul, right? Are they kind of saying these things are going to exist, but this style, that name, that I just ordered something for my husband the other day. I think it was like a bag to hold all his welding supplies. And I didn't pay attention to the brand when I ordered it. I paid attention to reviews and, and the pictures of it and the things that I say that people shouldn't do, like pay attention to the brand. And it arrived and I was like, oh, what is this crazy name on it that it's not a brand that I know. It's not even a brand. And first bag, the lining, it started to tear apart from the lining within a week. And so I, requested a replacement, and the second bag arrived a couple days ago, and already the handle is ripping off out of the box. So I think that was a big segue, though, to say, I think that Amazon is recognizing that it is moving in, and that's their intention as well, is to move in that direction, but still give space to both. So the traditional Amazon marketplace is going to be all about a traditional brand that has quality and value and recognition and values their customers. And then the new Amazon marketplace, Amazon Haul, is going to be the space for that, because there are shoppers who want both.
And I think what Jessica is saying is not that everybody has to be an inventor. Not everybody has to come up with the scrub daddy. But that if you're going to develop a product, rather than, I heard somebody call them jumble letter brands before. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was pretty appropriate. That I think a lot of people, I'm asked constantly on advisory calls and things like that. How do you think Temu is going to affect Amazon? How do you think Temu is going to affect Amazon? And honestly, I think that it's causing people to be more aware that there are some brands that are just putting things together. They're not high quality, and as that joke of, I got this on Wish is starting to extend to, I'm hearing people say, I got this on Shein. That's why it's that way. Or I got this on Temu. And, people have issues with those products and the product quality and some safety issues because they don't have the same rigorous testing, that people are getting more aware of that brand. So not that you can't have an iteration of an existing product, but that you need to build some sort of brand affinity around that to separate yourself from the jumbled letter brands. And that allows you to maintain a higher level of margins, which is really important because a lot of those jumbled letters are getting subsidies from China. So, we're not playing on an even playing field. Forgive me if I put words in your mouth there, Jessica.
No, 100%. And also just to double down on what I said about that being because it's my preference. I understand that it's an absolute only in my mind, but that's kind of the way I want to speak to people. That's the way that I want to work with people, because that's where I see the most value in the success. And you said something, Robin, that really struck me. I think probably the way I feel, the way I do about it is a big piece of that is the safety and the potential issues because of coming from a toy industry and a children's product background. And I learned e-commerce in tandem with being on the Safety and Advisory Council for the toy industry and going and speaking to lawmakers and talking about toy safety regulations and having to meet safety standards for my product and understanding how much that cost a brand and what that meant for the brand. And so I want to see those brands who are doing things the right way succeed. And I know that those brands are doing things the right way and are giving consumers things that are really valuable to consumers. So I want to see more of those as well.
That's amazing. So you mentioned something which is actually a big concern for a lot of sellers these days, which is compliance with regulations and compliance with Amazon, which might not even be the same. Amazon might be tougher than regulations in a lot of cases.
And Health Canada is more strict than US.
Yes.
And so it's from one place to another, you're just getting hit with it across the board. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a little bit of an open secret in which those challenging marketplaces represent great opportunity because they are smaller, they get ignored because the effort is not worth it compared to the size of the US market. But the reality is that if you invest in compliance for a foreign market, 25% of a tiny market represents much more than 2% of a huge market. And a lot of brands I'm working with who are selling mostly in foreign markets do really, really well. And their numbers are bigger than brands who are selling in the United States simply because they own 20% of the market in a smaller space. But the bigger question is this. I guess you work with a lot of brands now at AO2, and I imagine that a number of them do have to deal with compliance of all sorts. Do you find that it's getting harder and harder to stay on top of compliance, or do you think that there is a way for a brand to be ahead of the game? Or is it really going to be a situation of whack-a-mole where a brand thinks it's always doing everything right and Amazon is still going to come to you with something even after you're doing anything right? Is there a way to stay ahead of the curve?
I think there's kind of two answers to that. So coming from a background like I did, if you are not an e-commerce native brand, you're usually ahead of the game because you have to do all of those things. You've had to do it for most retailers have their own requirements. Similar to Amazon, a lot of retailers require you to work with certain testing labs or have certain certifications. So if you're not Amazon or e-commerce native, you probably are ahead of the game or ahead of those e-commerce native brands, at least. If you are e-commerce native, you have a lot less knowledge in those areas. Typically, you didn't know when you started your process that you even would have to worry about those things. And if you're Amazon exclusive or majority Amazon, then you're really in trouble because of how Amazon organizes it and how Amazon enforces it. And I think last year with the supplements, what did we get? Like 3 months notice of these massive changes that were going to require people who had never done any lab testing in their lives to have to do lab testing. So I think it's it's a sliding scale. And I think there is a way to get ahead, but you have to be educated. And if you're one of those brands who started out offline, you're definitely ahead.
So are you finding that the brands who were offline just have everything in the file cabinet whenever it's needed,
Yeah.
or do they get surprised also?
There's still a little surprises, but yeah, Robin, what are you seeing?
I mean, by brick and mortar retailers, they have everything ready. They already know the compliance. We have like a scarecrow owl, and we're like, oh, this is going to be a pest. They're like, oh, no, we have EPA rich. Of course we have EPA rich. Why
Right.
wouldn't we have those? Because they're required to get into those brick and mortars. We had one case where like one piece in a brick and mortar, like we had to test a component and it didn't pass, it kind of slid by on brick and mortar, but it's very rare for us to get caught off guard with our brick and mortar brands. I feel like this circles back to the other thing we were talking about earlier. I think this is why it's going to be harder to just throw products against the wall, is because before you could be like, I'm going to do children's pajamas. And, you and I were like, no, don't do children's pajamas. Because if you don't know, they're one of the most regulated products on the planet.
How do they fit? What materials are they made of? Like for
Flammability.
this age to this age?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Which is flammability, not to also be totally ADHD and get off topic, but one of the more interesting things I ever did in toy compliance was to do a tour of the Consumer Product Safety Commission and get to go on a day where they were both testing mattresses and pool drains. And to see how they do that, there was a room, a fireproof room with a mattress inside that they were trying to burn, and seeing how can we set this mattress on fire? How long does it take? And then the pool drains, they actually had a room with a pool and the drain, and they would have to get Eastern European blonde hair wigs, real human hair wigs. They could only use a wig once, and they would test to see, apparently that's the type of hair that is most likely to tangle. So they'd have to test that wig with a pool drain to see if it would get stuck. And if not, then they could move on to the next pool drain and they'd have to use a new wig. And so it was really interesting to see, but flammability in children's products made me think of that.
Yeah. And, so now a new brand that wants to get involved, that, you can't just like go from category to category. You're going to have to learn what the compliance is for that category. But, just kind of like the additional marketplaces internationally, if you can really understand a complexly, regulated space, and you can have all of that documentation, then you have an advantage over, somebody that's trying to sell something in a non-regulated space where anybody can come in. There's a low barrier to entry.
Or even like Abe said, if you start in one of those other countries with the smaller markets that tend to have more stringent regulations, like I would always have to test for European regulations, which typically were more strict than the US. So if I had already tested over there, most of what I already pulled together for that would let me pass my US testing very quickly. So by starting there, by scaling your brand there, you actually are opening that door for yourself to easily be able to come in and do US compliance, which is usually less strict, and have success here when you're ready to do that as a brand.
How hard is it to get a tour of the CPS seat?
That's something that's really interesting, and maybe we should look into, like, how could we arrange something like that for our industry?
A seller tour.
Yeah.
How do they not offer tours to the public? I mean, if you ever want to justify what you do, man, let people see it. But yes, consumer testing is a crazy thing. And I've definitely observed for many years at this point that people who can sell into retail have no issues with Amazon. People who start on Amazon thinking it's an easy place to sell are turned over by everything upside down. Like when Walmart gives you an order and says, we need you to distribute 20,000 units into 1,700 stores, and every store gets a different quantity, and everyone better have a label within 1/8 of an inch of the corner, you can do anything. And you are not faced by anything Amazon throws at you.
Yeah, such a good point. And I'll take it a step further from that too on the fees. Everyone who is an Amazon seller complains about the FBA fees, and you can usually tell by how they complain and what they're complaining about if they've ever done brick and mortar, because it's not that different than any other vendor agreement. Even though it's like, whether it's a vendor on Amazon or marketplace agreement, like it's all the same. Every place has their fees, and the fees stack up, and they have crazy requirements that you have to jump through.
Placement, slotting, all of those things can add up. And, I don't know about you, but my non-Amazon, the brick and mortar native brands, they come into Amazon. And since I always tell them it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, the Disney version, like it looks like a butterfly, but it's not, but it's actually a bread and butterfly. Everything's a little different and backwards and upside down. So I think that the pieces that seem like water to those of us that have been swimming in it, like that's just easy are the things that kind of throw them. But the compliance piece, I think they have, and they come within like an inert, like a concept of why it's important to build that affinity around their brand and why it's important to, kind of use that affinity to help them maintain that and increase the lifetime value of that customer.
Yeah, agree.
Does this all... Oh, go ahead, Robin.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I keep thinking back to this comparison between retail ready versus Amazon. And one of the things where Amazon thrives is the ability to try a thing or to stick your toe in the water. And if you have the ability to ramp up, you can do amazing things. So the simplest examples are things like fidget spinners or TikTok pants or all the kinds of things where you can take a flyer on a thing or you can hop on a trend quickly. You cannot do that at retail because everything has an entire cycle before it gets on a shelf. Does all of this do we still have an environment where these kinds of experimentations and freewheeling, do you think that still exists on Amazon, or do you think that it's going to be phased out over time?
I think it still exists now. For what exactly does the future look like? I just think it's getting harder and harder to get eyes on your products on Amazon. And that's where it's going to be a problem for that type of thing. There was a time when there weren't as many products. There's always been a ton of products, but there weren't as many products. There weren't advertising options at all. And then there became advertising options, but they were cheaper and more accessible. So I think that for me, just like a gut check decision without going too deep into it, I think that it still exists, but it's going to get harder. And just because of the number of products, the way that you get eyes on your products, if you're not investing in your brand or you're not investing in building that product, you're not utilizing those tools that are naturally going to get eyes on them. And so it's going to be harder for that reason, I think.
By tools, you mean advertising?
Advertising, I mean, brand stores, A+ content, premium A+ content, brand tailored promotions. If you're just a pop-up fly by night and I want to sell, 5,000 of these fidget spinners, you're probably not investing in brand tailored promotions or other things to get, customers back that looked at your product and didn't move on. So I think there's a number of different tools in a lot of different areas, but generally speaking, the brand tools that are available on Amazon, if you're not leaning heavily into that.
I think that what made Amazon so popular for that private label seller was that it was the wild, wild west. Field of dreams. You build it, they will come. You could slap things on. Now, in order to start an account, you have to go through this verification process, and you're going to get, if you put something in the toy category, it's going to get flagged for CPSC, and you have to have insurance and all of these different things that are required. And those are good things. The marketplace is maturing. And so it means that if you are really willing to, come with a matured product, or you have a product that you've done good research that you're willing to go all in on and invest in safety testing and advertising, but you can't just willy-nilly throw up an automatic campaign and get success anymore. So I see the future, like there still will always be people who are good and have developed a skill set and a talent and for that. But I think that more people will like dip their toe in places like TikTok shops or other marketplaces or their own website, D2C, where they don't have to deal with all of the regulations that come with Amazon now and the complexity that comes. And, I know that we always love when a brand has done some social media, it has some following, because it does help them launch on Amazon because they have that branded search to kind of give them that boost that they need in order to get that visibility as they come on.
Yeah, I think actually a really good point that maybe the social commerce becomes that new place that where they were seeing success, or what is defined as success for that type of product changes. You can still be successful, but now that bar for what is success has changed.
You find it's hard to account for the fuller picture of marketing a product now, because it used to be when Amazon was its own enclosed system, whatever sales happened on Amazon were genuinely because of Amazon. Whatever you spent on Amazon, the sales were connected to the spend very directly. These days, people are investing in all different places, and it includes giving away units to influencers. It includes affiliate marketing. It includes fee sharing and time spent and all kinds of things that go into bringing a person onto Amazon. Do you find it's difficult to account for it? Because one of the things I see is people are saying, I have an amazing ACOS. We spent so little on marketing. Look how much sales we get. And in that, they'll say that in one breath. And in the next breath, they'll talk about a mountain of work that goes into bringing in the shopper from somewhere else. And none of that is being accounted for in the dollars.
Yeah, I think it's so typical of an Amazon seller, and especially a native Amazon or a native e-commerce seller, to silo things like that.
Yes.
To not really look at the full supply chain, or to not look at their full, even just, book of business in terms of what all those sales channels are and how they all work together. So I think you're very right about that. And even in the Amazon ecosystem, that top of funnel is so much harder to quantify now than it used to be, because you've got AMC and DSP and STV and all of those things that are big spend, big, cast a wide net. You might see some return from it, but you can't tangibly quantify what that is the same way you can with some other advertising.
So that leads me to you just said something interesting.
Well, I hope it wasn't too interesting, because I know just surface level about those things I just said.
No, but in a simple way, it sounds to me like you're saying that AMC and DSP and all of the pipeline and flood of data is not necessarily making observations clearer. They're not necessarily making the actions to take clearer in a lot of cases. Is that what you're observing? I mean, all of a sudden you'll go from having 10 data points to 160. And it's a flood of things and signals and directions, but you don't necessarily still know a clear action to take in a lot of cases.
I'll say a short answer, and then I'm sure Robin has more to add, because she's a little bit closer to this stuff than I am. I think I know it's still not your exact sweet spot, but you and Nate together definitely know more than I do. But I think it's giving people more to think about. And it's making people make smarter decisions, just because it's opening their eyes to things that they previously had not considered, or previously thought, I will never be able to get my eyes on it or my, hands wrapped around it, so I shouldn't even think about it. And so now they're trying to make more informed decisions. Whether that's working for everyone or not, I don't know. But I think that it's moving in the right direction in that regard. And then, Robin, you probably have more intelligent things to say on that than I do.
Well, I mean, I think part of it goes to Amazon is actively courting large brands. And large brands, they need that visibility. They need to see that full funnel approach, especially if they're coming from a programmatic experience. And the other issue is that on Google and Meta, there's been less data that's available, less attribution that has been miscounting, those kinds of things. So I think by Amazon providing that clear attribution, it can take advantage of some people feeling unsure about how those dollars are being spent on other channels. I've also seen it with a lot of consumable brands. Now that they have that customer, they're able to see that lifetime value of the customer in a clearer way. They're able to see it does entice people to maybe do that big discount on Subscribe and Save, or to go harder on ads for the initial sale, knowing that they're going to be able to get product extensions out of that customer. So I think that, a lot of that comes down to Amazon's flywheel, and they're trying to incentivize discounts. They're trying to incentivize brands to be more aggressive. And because in their mind, they want the big brand to win over the jumbo letter brand, because they know that's a better customer experience. Now, whether they're doing that intentionally or it's just kind of slicing together, it seems to me that would be their motive behind it. I feel like it gives a lot of, attribution where there has been a lot of opacity. That's not the right word. If things have been pretty opaque on Amazon, and I think that that giving that visibility gives brands more ability to be able to invest that dollar more confidently, and it gives them an advantage over Walmart, where that reporting is not available. And so a brand's trying to decide between those two marketplaces, it does keep that ad dollar on Amazon. But I could be wrong.
There's a lot to digest in that. That's for sure.
Well, I think, because there might be people who are like, well, I've been doing private label for 5 years. If you're saying that maybe that's not as viable anymore, that kind of scares me. We're not saying private label is not going to be viable. We're just saying that before like if you've ever watched Shark Tank, he'll be like, well, that's a product, not a company, right? He'll say that's a product, not a brand. That, now you might have to take your product mix and say, okay, I'm making these into, real brands that have real followings, and, have, that affinity that people are proud and to display. I was just at an event where Jess Berger was at. And, she was talking about, she used to hide her dog food because, you'd get it and you'd kind of put it away. And she wanted to develop a product that people would feel proud of. And even in a commoditized product like a pet food. And I think that's a really good example of things to be thinking about as you're looking to build a brand around your existing private labels to create a moat around them. And as you're starting to look at ideating what products to create in the future.
So it's funny, as we talk about brands and as we talk about genuinely finding a place for the customer for our brands, this probably needs a much longer discussion. But I wonder, is there finite amount of shelf space in a shopper's head for brands? How many new genuine ideas and brands and personas can come out before some things have to be nudged out? So if you had a great idea 2 years ago, yes, you might have been front of mind and then medium of mind, but then the next amazing thing comes along and nudges out the thing that was from a while ago. Are we possibly heading to a world where brands will boost up and then phase out? Or is there really an ever-growing amount of space for new and unique brands? I'm not sure what the answer is. It's just a thing I'm wondering about.
I don't know that I have an answer, but I have a thought that accompanies that. I think there probably is a finite amount of space, but I think there's also the difference between like a brand having its moment and a brand succeeding and existing. When you think about like Stanley and the resurgence they had over the last couple of years, I have been a Stanley fan since I was a child and carried a little Stanley lunchbox and thermos when I went and did stuff with my grandparents. And for my entire life has collected Stanley products because I loved that brand and I loved, but I really loved the vintage ones. And I don't own a single new Stanley product since things came out. But Stanley has existed for 100 years and they've done well for 100 years and haven't gone out of business. And then they had this resurgence and they had their moment. And that moment is probably tapering off already, but they'll continue to be Stanley and be around for probably another 100 years or more because they're a good brand. And so I think, again, not answering what you asked, but adding a level to it of, what is that brand space in a person's head? And then what's the brand space in the collective universe? There's probably two different answers.
And is a brand able to continue to invent and reiterate? Because what has made those brands that have that longevity is, Igloo coolers now have plug-in coolers. And, so it's like in order to not be the blockbuster where you fade out and people make a joke about you being gone, or even Kodak, right? It's, it's brands that have iterated over and over. And sometimes that leads them pretty far from their product mix. But the investment that Stanley made in building up that brand and building up that reputation is what has allowed them to kind of come into that space and even to get, maybe the ability to launch products that they might not be able to launch if they didn't have that existing fan base that they could test, try, and iterate.
So I'm gonna do a little bit of thinking out loud.
Okay.
The first thing is there is one additional layer making things more complicated because Stanley existed for a century. Goodness, I don't know when it was founded. And there are many brands like that, soda brands and all clothing brands. There are many, many brands who have been around for essentially a century. And then there are many brands who have been around months or years or a decade or so. What's different about 2025 compared to that entire century that Stanley had to build their brand is we are now in an environment where brands get acquired. That never existed before. Stanley could be a family company and run and just do things according to their core ethos. These days, very, very soon after becoming popular, brand gets bought. It's what happens. They get acquired by somebody who gives a brand owner 25 years worth of revenue in 4 seconds, and they say, I'm turning away this 25 years of revenue as an acquisition. And immediately, the ethos that made it unique becomes conglomerated in a larger company, which has 77 different stakeholders, and they have to appeal to a much wider audience in a more generic way. That makes it much harder for brands to be unique. And then there's also the factor in which brands that used to occupy a premium position with investment in quality will be taken over by somebody who is only dominated by profit, and then quality goes down. So that makes things a little bit more complicated, I think.
Yeah. And an important piece in what you said too, that really drives that vision or the changes with that conglomerate is they're paying that 25 years worth of revenue up front. So they need to see results and very specific results
Right.
out of
They
those
need
brands
25 years
very
of
quickly.
revenue in 7 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, but the thing is that those brands get bought because they build up that brand affinity, and they've built up something. So like but the way that we do it is different. So like we look at Olipop, how they dominated not running a Super Bowl ad with a great social media strategy. I think that brands today are doing it in a different way, and that it's enough that when Mars buys a candy company or a pet food company, they want that brand to keep its identity because of the fan base that it has. But I don't.
I think all things are true. I think there are still also some of those, those mom and pop brands, like the toy company that I worked for, that they, 157 years, I think, maybe 159 years this year, because they wanted to be and chose to be a family-owned brand. And then there are the brands that launch with the intention of being acquired. They do everything they do to be one of those brands that are acquired. And then the others who kind of want to be their brand, but they get an enticing deal to be acquired, but they want to maintain some of that. And there's probably some of those acquirers, like you said, Mars, who are acquiring with the intention of keeping all of that brand integrity.
Do you find that there are some acquirers? I'm not sure how many brands you deal with that have been acquired by larger companies, but do you find that there are some acquirers who are better at keeping to the vision of the company they acquired, as opposed to some who are just all about the bottom line?
I can speak it on a very small level, and Robin, you may have some additional experience with that, but just from my experience with AO2, which has a sister company that is a VC that is acquiring brands. When we acquire those brands, and I say we, but I'm not really involved in that side of the business, but when we as this larger company acquire those brands, we do nothing to change the presence of those brands. So I think there are probably a lot of little VCs like us and even some of the bigger conglomerates who are definitely having that. It's less work. If you're not a Thrasio, if you're not, one of those things, which interestingly came up on the way to bingo last night with my neighbor and her sister, happened to be, she does liquidation. So she goes in when H&M goes out of business and cleans out. Like they actually were liquidating the Thrasio offices. And she was hearing what I was doing. She's like, oh, have you ever heard of a company called Thrasio? We'd never heard of them or what they do, but we just liquidated their offices. And here's all the crazy stuff that was in there. But, when you're not talking.
Can you say what kind of crazy stuff there was?
Yeah, because I'm getting at third parties. So who knows if I'm even telling the truth or not. But so depends on how much you guys want to fact check. But yeah, they had she described them as like interview pods, but to me, one of sounded like, do you know those like stereo chairs from the 70s? It was shaped kind of like an egg and it had the speakers inside. So they were like, they had workspaces that were kind of like those things, but also had electronics and USB ports and stuff built into them. Lots of crazy samples from brands that they probably never acquired. They had like, I don't know, like 400 and something like brand new unopened MacBooks. That were just there for whoever, the massive space of the office for, that really didn't have a return post-COVID. So I don't know, completely speaking out of school on these things. I'm getting the information third hand from the people who liquidated it, but it was an interesting story to me as someone in the space who saw it all happen and somebody who came in from outside and who had no knowledge of who they were.
It's wild because this is the second time in a week I'm hearing about a situation like this. I was just listening to a different podcast where they were talking about what it was like when Twitter was purchased and the work that they did to clean out all the excess expense. And they were talking about the ways that money was being wasted. And a couple of the things they said were so jaw-dropping. So they said originally in one office, they had 3,000 people in an office. COVID came, it went down to 150. The number of meals being prepared every day stayed exactly the same. Like they did not change it. Meals for 3,000 people, 2,700 meals thrown out every single day. And the other thing they would do is they would take a new office, they would retain the old office at $100 a square foot and use it for furniture storage. Like, what? They're using Class A office space as storage space for old furniture, which is crazy. And it happens when you get disconnected from results.
Yeah, and when you just have investors putting money in, and yeah, that you just reminded me another thing she mentioned. There's a full bar set up in there, and they had a full catering setup as well because they were still doing 1 day a week. Everyone would come into the office and get a fully catered meal and hang out and do the happy hour in the bar and everything. With again, no accountability for the results. Just go in and take advantage of these perks, and they weren't the ones paying the bills, so why did it matter?
Well, they ended up paying with a shorter career, but yes, there's always some price.
Well, and I know I keep circling back to the first thing, but I think that like one of the things with Thrasio is they were buying brands, but they were doing it from that, like just looking at the numbers of a product and buying it based off of that instead of looking at, what a brand is. And I think we talked a lot about how branding is important, but there might be someone who be like, okay, you just told me things are falling apart, so I was wondering, Jessica, if you wanted to share some things that you see where maybe a company that started private label or what your experience with brands working on the retail side, what are some good ways for somebody who has a successful product to be able to build out the brand for that product or to start practicing that muscle as they try to find their more long-term products?
Yeah, I'm glad you circled back to this because it lets me, just reiterate again that I don't necessarily consider private label to not be a brand, right? I think I consider private label to be like in kindergarten on its way to the brand, so I don't always throw that in the same bucket as those jumble name brands because they're not all the same.
No.
There is a distinction within that. And yeah, we've seen a lot of success with, I think the biggest thing is when you start your retail journey, wherever it is, paying attention to the customer. That's the most important thing in building your brand. So on Amazon, you get the opportunity to do that through product reviews and hearing that feedback in that way and making changes to your product and making changes to how you present your product to address those things, right? Amazon doesn't give you a ton of opportunity to actually talk to your customers, but your customers are constantly talking to you and you're able to constantly talk back to them through some of those things. And that to me is like the number one starting point, is to hear what the users are saying about your brand and those competitors. And this is not new. People have talked about this for a long time, but if you're asking the question, that's still going to be the answer for me, is to the people who are actually shopping your product, hear what they're saying, adapt things to what they're saying, and then market to what they're saying. Whether your marketing is social media and influencers, whether it is using Amazon brand tailored promotions, whether it is something that's a little bit gray area, but absolutely allowed, right? You can have product inserts on Amazon. You have to be careful what those product inserts say. But within many industries, you're required to provide people a way to register their product for tracking, for, compliance issues or recalls and that sort of thing. So, leveraging that ability on Amazon to be able to connect with your shoppers. Here, this is where you go register your product. Now I've collected your information. Now I can engage with you on a more meaningful way and help build brand loyalty through point systems or feedback loops or, discounts and those sort of things. There are options that are there for you to do that. And that's the number one thing for me. If you start engaging with the customer and getting creative about how you do that and actually pay attention to what you learn from that and apply that to your product and your marketing, that's your first step on that road to truly building a brand.
And, like some of the brands that we're seeing that are having the most success are actively engaging with people in social media. They're still talking to customers face to face. Even larger brands, founders will go and do those Costco roadshows, and understanding the different marketplace, the different social media places. So on TikTok, you can be a little bit more unhinged. You might need to be more aesthetic on Instagram, but having that relationship. And what I've seen also with those brands is that when they come out with product extensions, they're more successful because they're not guessing what the customer wants. They have this almost built-in focus group. And, so we worked with a barware company like 5-10 years ago. And what they just built a Facebook group about, creating cocktails and for bartenders. And from there, the bartenders were able to hear like, oh, what I don't like about this mat is, and they were able to build really great product extensions. And that fed into the reputation that their brand had for quality. And so it allowed them to keep that. And because they had that, they were able to keep their margins a lot higher than all of the people that were racing to the bottom.
Yeah.
That's so interesting
Actually,
about the product extensions, by the way. I once heard a masterclass from somebody, and he basically said when they do product development, one of the core things that go into product development is they need the roadmap for the first 10 related items. They will not release something unless they already know the next 10 things that people are going to want based on the first one. And like he gave us an example, I might bring a plate to market, and already I know that I'm going to bring the charger for it, and a bowl that matches to it, and a set of utensils that match to it, and a glass, and I'm going to make a matching napkin, and that will be my roadmap from the plate of day one. But if there is no path to 10 items, it's not worth the investment that goes into making the first one succeed, because the first one is very expensive to make succeed. You need to amortize it over a whole bunch more products.
yeah. And another thing you said that kind of ties that in, and the Facebook group where you said, however long ago it was, that's still very relevant. While Abe was talking, I looked it up on my phone. So I am currently in a Facebook group and I don't post on Facebook ever, but I am on Facebook and in this group for a brand called Portland Leather, which makes handbags. And I'm not a purse person. I'm not a shoe person, but for some reason I bought one of their bags. I liked it. I joined this insider group that they have on Facebook. There's over 150,000 people on it who are active daily. There are employees from Portland Leather, and they're keeping the conversations going, but talking about what colors should come out next, what accessories could come from, for inside their bags, a tassel to hang on the outside of the bag, a smaller bag to put inside of that bag. And more than once, I have been encouraged to buy something without even realizing that it was happening to me, because everybody in the group was getting excited about something. And whether, wherever I go to make that purchase may be different from one thing to the next and from one person in the group to the next, but it's that excitement of being part of that group, helping build it, choosing what to make, that's getting me excited about something organically.
We have a brand that's in the bakeware category, and they have really invested in social media and building up a following. And it's given, people are always like, oh, I don't want to have all my eggs in one basket with Amazon. Because of that, she's been able to get affiliate relationships with other non-competing products. And she's been able to supplement her income that way. And she's getting ad revenue off of her blog. And, so she's diversifying. Even if Amazon and that product were to go away, she still has an audience that she could move in a different direction, which I think is really powerful. And, I know there's going to be somebody who says, well, I don't like to be on camera. That's not really an excuse anymore, because you can do a lot of faceless. There's a lot of companies that do really great things with faceless videos. As long as you're really keyed into your audience, you can do a lot of it with comments and, iteration back and forth. And there's even tools that you can get an animated, and then you can have that animated person where you do the recording like this and it turns it into an animation. CapCut is amazing. I'm glad it's back. So there's still a lot of opportunity there, even if you don't feel comfortable having your face on it. But I do think there's a big advantage to have a founder who's willing to get in front of a camera.
Yeah. By the way, going back to that Facebook group, Jessica, the masterclass that I heard on how to launch a product included launching a Facebook group with a dedicated brand manager whose job was to stir up excitement around product launches. So it is very, very likely that what you experienced as organic excitement was very much steered by someone. It is actually curated.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely is. But they get people excited, and then those people, it's catching, right? Even if I don't ever see anything from that brand manager, now they have all these ambassadors who are not officially ambassadors. They're getting nothing for doing it.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So
the one person who's paid, but the 156,000 people who are in there, the majority are not, and they're doing it.
It's funny because after I learned about that strategy, it was amazing. So one of the things I like to do is to barbecue. And I'm in a group for guys from the New Jersey area that like to barbecue. As soon as this person gave that masterclass and explained that one thing they do is they will work with an influential person, have that influential person create a Facebook group. They're sponsoring that guy to run and be active in the group. And then every once in a while, they'll be launching things and he'll give a shout out. As soon as he said that, I'm like, this influencer and that group is sponsored by this company of thermometers. I know, right away, everything clicked into place. I'm like, son of a gun.
And when did you see, like, when did you see that masterclass?
But this was probably 3 years ago. So this isn't,
Right. So,
it's not 10 years old, but it's not new
no,
either.
that's what's really interesting to me is that I think that most people we're speaking to right now would not have guessed that Facebook groups are still a big part of marketing strategy.
I don't really post much on Facebook either, but I'm on there for the groups. You know, and when I have something new that I need to solve, I will go to, now part of that tells a story on my age, right? It tells on me a little bit, right? But there's also, you can do that in all the multiple places. You know, so there's lots of ways. You don't have to be, if you're against Meta or you don't want to, there's lots of other places to build. But, you know, build that real connection, whether it's in person at road shows, whether it's on social media, whether it's working with influencers. And then I think another thing that's important is that, you know, you really build an aesthetic around your brand. So having clear brand guidelines so that when people come to knock off your products, then, you know, that your people are able to quickly see that that is your product and differentiate. And I think sometimes brands will, well, it's not really important, but having the feel, there's a reason why Amazon is so particular about its branding and its trade dress.
Yeah, I don't hear that. I don't hear that word often enough, trade dress.
Yeah. Well, and it also to protect your trade, like if you don't have that trade dress, so, you know, then it's when people come and mimic your style to try to draft off your listings, it's impossible. If you haven't established that as a trade dress and you haven't, like, you don't have things that are, you know, you haven't really built that up, it becomes a much more difficult place to protect your IP. You lose one of the levers that you can use to kind of protect your brand.
Yeah, that's true. So, Jessica, if we spoke about a lot of things in general ways, but obviously there is an audience here that wants to learn specific things. One of your areas of expertise is branding and using branding as a lever for growth. What kind of things could you suggest to somebody who doesn't have an effective system yet? Like, what kind of tips could you give somebody to build their brand from where they are up now to being something more significant?
And I think it depends on, you know, what their brand is, what their go-to-market strategy is, but two things that are really critical that I think you can't do without in 2025. Both of them may seem really simple, but if you're not thinking about it concretely, you know, the first thing is if you're planning to sell anywhere in the US, make sure you have your trademark, your copyright, like the trade dress, you know, all of that is important, but for actually being able to enforce things, and that is important, do those things and do them the right way. So start there.
What things?
Trade. Well, it depends on the brand and the style, but the trademark or copyright or patents or some combination of the above, right? Depending on what your product is and how unique it really is. We're talking about private label versus branding, right? Patents are probably going to be more applicable to the brand versus the private label. But in that case, you still have copyrights and trademarks you can go after for whatever it is. Unless you're one of those jumble names, you're probably not trademarking that jumble name. So that is number one for everyone that's applicable. And then if you're going to be an Amazon, you know, heavy seller, whether it's Amazon native or that, do your brand registry from day one before you get started in any way and do it right. I've heard horror stories and helped people through horror stories where they have either given their rights to someone else because they didn't want to sell on Amazon and now they can't get it back, right? I'm the brand, but I let other people sell it. So I gave someone the rights to go ahead and just sell it on Amazon and manage the brand. And now they've gone out of business and my brand rights are associated with their account. And how do I get that back from my brand now that I want to sell on Amazon? Or we've dealt with one in the last year at the agency where they paid another agency. That agency had a service to set up brand registry and set up trademarks for them. And now that agency is the respondent with USPTO. So now that they're ready to actually do the Amazon brand registry piece, all of their notifications are going to that old agency and they're not getting them. So they can't follow through with the brand registry process. So I guess it's one way of saying make sure you get Amazon registry, but maybe the more important piece of that is how critical it is to do every piece of everything you're doing with Amazon right from the start. Because with Amazon, it is very difficult to dial it back. And then I think, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing. You know, I'm thinking of situations where somebody will associate a phone number of a person that doesn't work there anymore, and God help you to find that person.
Now you can't get into your Seller Central account at all because you can't get the OTP. It happens so often. So often. Yeah. And then I think the last thing that I would suggest, if I'm trying to give just a couple quick tips, is in 2025, social commerce or social influencers, one or both need to be, one or the other or both need to be part of your strategy. If you truly want to build a brand, regardless of what product you are, whether it's barbecue tools, whether it's purses, whether it's, baby products or pet products, that is both an integral part of getting in front of a wider group of people. But as, I think all of us have mentioned at some point here in some capacity, it's that product testing. It's the feedback generation. It is the way to build your community that is going to be essential in truly building a brand today.
And I think that barbecue example is a really good example. People might consider that just as a private label opportunity. But if you start to build a brand and at the same time you're doing grilling videos or you work in conjunction with somebody who's got a big grilling following, that gives you a huge advantage and completely brings you into the marketplace in a different way than if you were to just launch it as a private label brand by itself without that social commerce.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, that ties to a passion for the product as opposed to somebody that just found like a search volume and a gap of sellers.
Yes.
You're never going to love the product as much as something that you genuinely use yourself.
Exactly. So yeah, maybe like to continue to redeem myself from that first comment, we're further defining what is, what are we saying that's just like a Me Too product versus a private label versus a brand. And there's a huge gradient, path in there of what is what.
So you mentioned social influencers versus social commerce. Social influencer is pretty clear. A person who tells their audience about their product and drives interest and demand. How do you define social commerce? What's included in that?
So my definition may not be the textbook definition, but I mean, you can sell on Instagram.
Your definition is the one of an expert, so that's what I like.
Yeah, I mean, you can sell. So, I mean, TikTok shop, right? You can have TikTok shop without actually having influencers. A brand can open a TikTok shop and just have things for sale there without having influencers selling the product. The same is true of Instagram. You can sell products and link out to purchase the product. Poshmark, Facebook, all have those features, right? So you're just selling the product on the platform. You're getting in front of the shoppers on that platform without actually influencing them, right? You might do ads, you might do, marketing to get them, but it's very different than truly paying or gifting product to influencers, to have the influencers you influence someone to buy the product. And usually there's a link and you can still click through and do that, but that's an added layer to it beyond just saying, here's my product, it's for sale, buy it if you want it.
Got it. So that probably, if I would use different words, I would say have your product available in the social media hangouts of the internet, available for purchase, which really goes back to something I heard crystallized 6 months ago, which is basically this was a person whose product does very well on Amazon, and it was compared to a person who's influential, but they don't sell their product on Amazon. And this person said, listen, who am I to be the gatekeeper of this product and tell my buyer who's interested, no, you can't buy it here. My responsibility is to make my product available any place my shopper shops. So this goes along with that. Social commerce basically is any social site that has a shopping element. Make sure your product is in that mix of shopping elements to search for.
Yeah, because, a point I think you kind of alluded to there is there are different shoppers on every platform, and that is always going to be true. The Walmart shopper is not necessarily the Amazon shopper, is definitely not the Target shopper, is not the Instagram shopper, so there's opportunity everywhere and for every product. I mean, there are obviously some products that will natively do better on some platforms because of the age range of the user and the gender or whatever it might be, but there is a shopper for your product on every platform, and just figuring out how to get it there and get it in front of the right people with the right, do you need the influencer to make it happen? Is there certain branding you need to make it happen? Is it just about price on that platform? Whatever it is on the platform, just be there so you have the opportunity to capitalize on it.
Okay, so I have to ask a thing I've wanted to ask about for an hour. You mentioned buying welding accessories for your husband, and being a very urban male, I know nothing about welding, but the idea of flame throwing things that you can hold in your hand is very exciting. What exactly kinds of things does a non-professional welder weld? Or is your husband a professional welder?
He is professional, but I think there's a lot of like hobbyists out there who will do things. If you are, a person who's of skilled trade of any capacity, right? Or even a person who has worked with power tools, you probably could easily find your way into, a little welding machine and doing some things, but it is very technical. But like tack welding, just easily putting together, he can probably hear me from where he is and is like, she is not explaining this well. She has no idea what she's talking about. But, before
we can have him on too if he wants to tell us about his welding accessories. Like I grew up watching that home improvement show, and I was absolutely mesmerized by this guy having an entire garage of tools and equipment and things he could
like
do.
Bob Vila or
Yeah,
No,
he
it
means
was,
like Tim the Tool Man Taylor.
like,
that's
more
what
power.
I was talking about.
I always
exactly.
get this stuff because I've been around like actual skilled tradespeople for so long. I often get these things wrong. Or you're like, I'm talking about a TV show, and I'm like, you mean this actual guy who does these actual things? One time it happened with somebody said something about just your husband used man soap, and I was like, oh, you mean like Gojo? Like the stuff that gets grease off your hand. And they were like, no, I meant like Irish Spring body wash. So I'm always just a little off the mark with it. But yeah, I think that there's, if you're just I think one of the things he did like before he was doing it a lot is, putting together some pipe for our chicken coop, not like a massive project, but just, stuff that just needs to be together enough to hold something in versus, if he's going to go and weld on a large tractor, or something at the wood yard. I think he's done some stuff for the people who at the sawmill. That you need a professional welder for. You need somebody who actually knows what they're doing versus a hobbyist who's just putting together something for their own use.
My imagination is going in like 100 different directions right now. I'm hearing like chicken coops and wood piles, and I'm like,
my life is so different.
My life is so different. I'm like, I consider like having a driveway being part of like nature instead of living in an apartment building. Like I graduated from an apartment building to a place with a backyard. That's my wildlife, Occasionally a couple of deer stroll by, and that's my wildlife. And I'm hearing about chicken coops and stuff. I'm like, wow, that's wild.
Yeah, and the bears who break into the chicken coops and
okay.
Bears
I actually have a very practical question that I never thought I'd be able to ask. So a hen is the female and a rooster is the male, or a cock, whatever.
I hope that's not your question, because we might need to have a longer conversation.
That is not the question. No. This is actually a practical question.
Well, let me just say, if you ever do have my husband on the podcast, do not get into this topic because he has one trivia point about roosters that he loves to share that I'm not sure is like safe for all audiences. So
we have an editor. We can just release the PG version. Goodness knows I should probably release a PG-13 version anyway of what I'm thinking.
I can share it on his behalf then once you ask your question if it seems relevant.
Well, yeah, I'm very excited. Okay, but no. So the question is this: for a person who lives in New York City and happens to live next to some weirdo that has a rooster next door, and the rooster is going off at 4:30 a.m., is there a way to make the rooster shut up?
So, yeah, I think like people think roosters crow at daylight, and they can't tell time.
No.
They aren't doing that.
No, they don't. Crowing, I know this firsthand. No.
In most cases, either because they either want to be let out of wherever they are in because they want to go start grazing or start the day, or they do it as there's a threat. I see something that's not supposed to be here. I'm going to warn all my girls so they can go hide and get safe. So no, I don't think there's really anything you can do to stop it because he's doing it for one of two instinctual reasons, probably.
So there's no snooze button.
Yeah. So I know more, but not necessarily anything that helps me.
Yeah.
I think your plugs are going to be your safer bet there.
They don't help. No.
It's interesting they're allowed because I know in a lot of more urban areas, they'll allow you to have hens for egg production because you don't need a rooster.
Oh, the rooster is 100. The rooster is 100% illegal. No question about it. This is confirmed, checked with the state of New York City. It is 100% an illegal rooster.
But nobody's doing anything about it.
But the police officers of New York have more pressing issues than a rooster.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah,
they've got like a lot. They've got a lot bigger. I mean, maybe if it was next to the senator's house or something, it might get us some more
then
attention.
It might matter.
No,
Good call.
The Senator is like 4 blocks away. It's not close enough. But yeah. Okay, so story time from your end. Do tell.
So I don't remember how he learned this or when he learned this, but it was later in life and very surprising for him that roosters do not have a penis. They have a hole on their body, and there are, there's balls up inside there that create what needs to be created, but they have a hole. Hens have a hole. They rub their holes together, and that is the end of it. And
I think that's perfectly fine for most audiences. It absolutely is fascinating biology.
I think it's interesting that a rooster is kind of a terminology or euphemism for a certain part, but then they don't have that part.
Then they don't have it. Right.
Yeah.
So this
That's
is
so weird. Maybe it used to be an insult.
And there's probably,
Maybe it used to be an insult.
Yeah. That's actually a good point, because roosters are so like machismo, and it's all about the bravado and the cockiness, for lack of a better word.
I guess the roosters were the original BMW drivers. That's the part we have to cut out. We don't want to cut out our BMW sponsorship opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, I can't think of anything we could talk about that would top that. So
no, that's pretty much the showstopper. Yes.
We'll end it there.
I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. I know we ran over a little bit. We keep doing that. If people want to get a hold of you, you post some really great things on LinkedIn, so they should 100% follow you on LinkedIn. What are some places that people can follow you at?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best one for AO2 specifically. We have LinkedIn, YouTube, and also Instagram, and those are all under the AO2 management name. And then we will be in person at Prosper next month. For the first time ever, we will have a booth at Prosper. So I'm really, really excited for that as we usher in a new era with me taking over the president position, being able to exhibit at a trade show for the first time for our agency, but specifically Prosper, because that one is near and dear to my heart. So anyone who is planning to attend Prosper would love to see you face to face there.
Awesome.
They can see all three of us. We can get a group.
Oh, yes. Very exciting. That must be on the to-do list.
It needs to be.
Yes, it's a great show. So I want to thank you for coming on today. We'll post links to her LinkedIn in the show notes. We hope that you've enjoyed listening as much as we have of recording this one. We definitely talked about some topics that weren't on the board. So I want to thank you for listening, and have a prosperous week.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Top of Search podcast. Have a burning question you would like answered or a topic you would like featured in a future episode? You can submit it at topofsearchshow.com. If you love the episode, subscribe and leave a review. Each month, we'll be selecting one reviewer to win a one-on-one call with your choice of Abe or Robin. Winners will be announced at the end of the first episode of every month.